but she was just got charged $100 for every one day, and we got the call. It's like, I do 25. Our practice.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started, if that's okay. Can everyone hear me well at this level? Yeah? All right. Good morning. So my name is Carla Belcher. For those of you I've not met before, I'm the school counselor here in the lower school. This is my 4th school year. Is that right? Yeah, something like that. And as always, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for joining us this morning. This morning, my talk is going to be about parenting with inclusivity. And so kind of a general outline of what that's going to look like this morning. I'm going to talk a little bit in general about what parenting with inclusivity means. And that sort of term with inclusivity covers everything. So this is not just about sort of DEI, it's about differences of all kinds, whether it's different family rules, to differences in skin color, to differences in religion, to differences in mental health, differences in physical disabilities. So I'm going to kind of start broad and talk about just some general ways to have conversations in your home with your kids about differences. And then I'm going to break it down to a little bit more specific. Most importantly, my biggest topic will be sort of how to have conversations with your children around differences in sort of mental health or invisible illnesses, because those are some of the trickiest conversations to have. So starting conversations and kind of what does it mean to parent with inclusivity? I'm going to try to move this in front. So in my description for this morning, I talked a little bit about how we here at PCDS, we work really hard to create classrooms of belonging, right? So PCDS, one of the gifts that we do here really well is making everyone feel included and unique, and we embrace differences from a very young age. So starting in pre-K, we have very real open conversations with kids about what it means to be different, unique, how to lead with curiosity, that's a really big one, how to understand someone else's beliefs without compromising your own, and also how to embrace everyone with kindness and acceptance. A lot of these, you guys are naturally having conversations at home, but what I find is that a lot of parents don't always have the language around how to have more specific conversations about very specific things that your kid might bring up, or something that you notice that you feel like you need to have a conversation with them about, and then it's like, oof, how do I do that? It's sort of like the birds and the bees talk, where I'm like, oof, somebody give me some words, somebody give me some language, because this is a tricky one, and we all freeze up, and we're like, we don't want to say the wrong thing. So I'm going to here to give you a little bit of language for how to have conversations with your kids about things that might be different in your family than other families. The most common and robust conversations that you're going to have with your children ever about any of these topics are going to start with a curiosity statement or question from them. So seize on those moments, right? So if they happen to say to you, Mom, Dad, why does this kid have X, Y, and Z? Or why does their family do X, Y, and Z? Seize on those moments because it's much more natural and kids are able to connect when they have a real life example much easier, right? So use those moments. However, if they do bring up something, don't assume that you know what their intent behind the question is or the curious statement, right? So don't automatically sort of put in or freeze or think, oh my God, where is this going? Because you have no idea. Typically, it might be a very, very, very basic, curious, surface level question that can be answered in 2 seconds and you can move on. So try to take it for where they're starting at, right? And ask more questions. And stick with the facts. I'll get more to that. If a question doesn't come up naturally and you need to sort of bring up something or you need to front load something, maybe something that's coming up or something that you know you're going to kind of run into and they might have questions when you're there or when you're in public, then you start with something like, hey, do you know about X, Y, and Z? Or hey, have you ever heard of X, Y, and Z? Do sort of more of an open-ended you trying to gauge their knowledge first, right? So give them a chance to help you understand what their baseline is. So you might say something like, also, have you ever noticed that Polly's family doesn't celebrate this holiday? And then you pause and you see like, oh yeah, they told me they do this, or whatever, and then hear kind of where they are. Also something like, I'm curious, have you ever heard of X, Y, and Z? And if you don't know the answer, which I know you've heard this before, we are not supposed to know all of the answers. If you're a personality like mine who likes to know all the answers to everything, this is a really good learning moment for you, because your parenting will force you to pause. My parents like to say that I make things up all of the time sometimes when I don't know the answer, because I'm one of those people that likes to know the answer to everything. But I have to really try really hard not to do that with my own kids. So I might have to pause and be like, you know what, I don't know the answer to that. Let me figure that out and let me get back to you. Or hey, you know what, that's a really good question. I'm not sure about that religion, or about why they might celebrate this, or about what the history is behind their heritage. Let's look it up together, especially if they're an older kid, and look it up with them. Kids also need to see that you can problem solve through something that you don't understand, right? So it's modeling at its finest right there. And also that you don't have all the answers all the time, because that's the reality. And as they get older and the questions get more complicated, and if you have teenagers, you also know that you don't have all the answers. And sometimes there are no answers, right? But it is helpful for you to just pause and sometimes say to them, listen, I'm not sure, but let's look that up, or I'll look that up and I'll get back to you, I promise, and I'll figure that out. All right, so again, I'm going to give just a few more basic things before we get into the meat of the sort of more specific categories. So modeling, we say this about everything at school as teaching staff, but also as parents. Kids are going to most emulate what you do, not what you say. So if you are trying to talk to your children about the importance of embracing difference and treating others with respect, they need to see you doing that too. I know that sounds basic, but even if you're having, one-off conversations with another adult and your kids are in the room, they're listening. They are noticing. They might not be hearing your words, but they're noticing your body language. Are you sitting there and you're maybe talking about somebody else, and maybe it's not even something bad, but the way that you are presenting yourself in the company of people who might be different than you in X, Y, and Z, a million different ways, your kids are noticing. Don't forget that. So your actions, both subtle and overt, are what they will emulate. Acknowledging the difference. So I think probably generations ago, and maybe not so long ago, we kind of came from this mindset of to start to be like, oh, everyone's the same. We treat everyone the same, which we do, but everyone's not the same, right? And so trying to teach your child, like, to see everyone as the same is actually counterproductive. And I know that you want your children to treat everyone the same. Don't get me wrong, but we also need to acknowledge that there are differences. Whether or not it's the skin color, whether or not it's they have a physical disability, whether or not it's they act differently, whether or not their family has different family rules around screens or around politics or whatever it is this day and age. It's okay to acknowledge the difference, and it's actually really helpful because kids can see through that BS. They're like, you say we're all the same, but we're really not, because Johnny looks different than me, Sally has different rules, Kelly has 2 moms and I don't, like everything, right? They notice and they pick up on everything. And so while you're trying to tell them this message of everyone is the same, treat everyone the same, it's correct, but break that down a little bit more. Acknowledge the differences. It's really helpful for them, and you can approach it in a very neutral tone, right? It doesn't have to be, there's no emotion attached to when you're telling someone that there might be a difference in someone else's house. A more sort of non-emotional that you make it, the more kids will help to understand that it's just a part of the uniqueness of somebody else, right? And also just encouraging to talk, like in your own family, to talk with your own children about what their uniquenesses and their differences are, right? Not making them a big deal. Like, oh gosh, your brain works in this way, and it's probably going to be different than someone else's brain works, and that's okay. Now we know this. So if your kid has attention issues, if your kid has learning issues, if your kid struggles with mental health, name it. Tell them that they're unique in this way, and everyone is unique in lots of different ways, especially this day and age, now that we name it so much more, right? Probably when a lot of us were growing up, there weren't as many of those differences and uniquenesses because we didn't have the language around them. But now we do, and it is very common, and many kids are all neurodivergent and learning in different ways. So help them acknowledge, embrace, and understand that, rather than, there's a lot of thoughts still of like keeping it quiet or keeping it a secret. And kids feel that. There becomes shame around it if we do that. And I know nobody is intending to do that. We're all trying to protect our children and do what's best we think at the moment for them. But what I'm telling you is that the more that we acknowledge differences and help them embrace them at a younger age, the more self-confident they will be about who they are as they get older. Challenging intolerance. We all do this probably most comfortably with our, maybe our partners in our own home. So if your child, says something, or you hear something on the TV that is maybe indicating bias or prejudice, don't meet the action with silence, right? So this is something that we've all heard before. Silence usually means acceptance, even though when you don't mean it to. But challenging intolerance is a skill that's acquired for some people. It doesn't come naturally, it doesn't come easy for some of us, particularly maybe peacemakers, people who don't like to rock the boat. But it is important that your child hears you challenge intolerance. I'm not saying you have to be out in public, and if somebody says something that doesn't align with your beliefs, you have to walk up to them and be like, well, look, child, look what I'm going to do right now. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying in your own home, in the comfort of your own home, if maybe your child says something, or you hear something on TV, or they say, hey, so-and-so said this at school today, challenge with them. Challenge and help them understand, that's not something that we believe in this house, or that's not something that's kind to say out loud, or can you help me understand more about what you thought that meant when you said that? The more conversations you have around it, the less they'll think that it's okay, right? So when we just kind of sweep things under the rug and be like, oh, you don't need to know anything about that, and then you move on, they're left with more questions, because the child's imagination is usually far worse than reality. Seizing, I already said this, seize teachable moments. School-age children in particular respond so much better to lessons that involve real-life examples. So I, all of the time in my own house, make up things that happen to me. It's my greatest parenting trick. So if a kid comes to me, and one of my children, and is like, oh my gosh, so-and-so said this to me today, or I freaked out before this, and if I don't have an example that I can actually remember from childhood or from recent, I'll be like, oh my God, that totally happened to me before, and this is how I handled it. Because if you just say, oh, of course we validate, oh my goodness, that must have been scary, or that must have been really anxious, might even be anxious or whatever, and then we just sort of tell them how to handle it or whatever, they don't connect it as well. But if they can remember this elaborate, weird story that you told them about how when you were 10 and, this happened to you, I'm telling you it's going to click. And they're going to be like, first of all, they're going to be like, oh, that happens to other people? Oh, okay. Because that normalizes, right? So, hey, I remember this one time, X, Y, and Z. So it normalizes it for them, which is usually half of what they're looking for. Because if you remember growing up, when things happen to you, often you think that you're the only person in the world that it's happening to, right? And that is a very lonely and scary feeling. So first, we're helping normalize. Yep, that happens to other people too. And then second, we're helping to give them a strategy for how to deal with that. That's not just like, here's what you do. It's like, here's what I did, and it worked really well, right? Even if it didn't, and you just made it up. Don't tell my children, okay? And then, this always goes without saying, emphasize the positive. So if you catch your kid doing something and treating people kindly, or going out of their way to help a friend at school, or if you're at soccer practice and they, let somebody get in front of the line in front of them, or if they go bend down and pick up a piece of trash for somebody who dropped it, like just the littlest things that are treating people with kindness and with inclusivity, capitalize on those, because those are also when kids connect real life to a feeling or memory that they get that was positive, that is going to sink in much more than you just saying, it's really great when people do X, Y, and Z. It's like, oh, it's really great that I saw you do this. And then they're going to like, yeah, I'll do that more, because that's awesome. All right, so now I'm going to sort of move into my categories of inclusivity. So the first one, which I'm not going to spend much time on because it's the most obvious, and you guys probably all know how to do this really well, but it's inclusivity within family cultures, race, religion, all that kind of stuff. Those are the most common conversations that come up from a very young age. Those revolve around, oh, so-and-so's skin color is different than mine. Oh, so-and-so says that they go to this church and we don't go to church. Or so-and-so says they don't celebrate Christmas and we celebrate Christmas. Those happen pretty organically, usually for kids. And that goes all along the same lines of stick with facts. Always stick with the facts. Don't insert your own assumptions around why they're asking. Keep it very matter of fact. Offer to look up information that you don't know. And also make sure that, and this is one I'm going to harbor into your brains while we're here, there is ways to tell your children what your family beliefs are without putting down someone else's family beliefs. This one gets really tricky for parents, and it can be subtle, and kids will pick up on it. So if you are Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Republican, Democrat, whatever it is that you are, I am not taking away those beliefs from you, but I want you to work really hard to let your children know that your beliefs are not necessarily superior to anyone else's beliefs. I'm going to say that again. Your beliefs are not necessarily superior. Superior means you're above, right? To anyone else's beliefs. I am not saying that your beliefs are not incredibly important to you, and they should be, in core family values and traditions and culture and heritage, and all of those things should be passed down to your children and should be embraced and loved. However, we live in a world, particularly now, more than ever, is polarizing for a million different things, right? We have to make sure to pass along the message to our children that this is what our family believes, this is what we practice, this is what we do, these are our family rules, this is our blah, 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 all the things. Someone else's family might look very different than ours. Period. There is no emotion attached to it. There is no, I'm better, they're not. It is simply stick with facts. This is what our family believes. This is what our family celebrates. It is different than other families. Other families have different rules. Other families have different cultures than us. And they do what they believe in. Period. It doesn't have to be emotionally charged. And the kids pick up on these things, guys, like really, really, really subtly. And so we have to be careful about our messaging. Inclusivity with physical disabilities. This one, because we're going to get to my favorite, the invisible illnesses. Physical disabilities is a sort of an easier topic, if you will, because you can see them, right? So you're walking down the street, your kid notices someone in a wheelchair, notices somebody with a cane, notices somebody that might have some, missing limbs or some deformities, you are able, now granted we might say, don't stare, right? Those are the common messages we give, don't stare, we can talk about it later, but encourage your child to ask questions about those things. The more exposure that they have and the better understanding that they have for why these things happen to people, the more empathetic and kind they can be when they see somebody else that might not look like them. So instead of being like, oh, you don't need to worry about that, I'm going to tell you that little kids' imaginations are vast. So if you sort of sweep under the rug, if you see a kid maybe in a wheelchair or a kid who might look very different, and your kid's like, whoa, what happened to them? And you're like, don't stare, it's okay. They might start thinking, oh my goodness, is that going to happen to me? Could that happen to my little brother? Does that happen to everyone? Could I just wake up one day and have to be in a wheelchair? These are the questions that will go through their brain. So make sure you address it. Maybe it's not the right time, right when you're there and you see them and you might say to them, yeah, look at that. They're in a wheelchair. They have to get around somewhere a different way than we do. We can talk about that later. And then circle back with them. Depending on their age, you don't have to give them like all the diagnoses that somebody might have, right? But more of like, yeah, you know what? Some kids are born like that. Some kids might have gotten into a car accident. Some kids, whatever it is, stick with facts. Keep it very simple. They don't need a lot. If they ask more questions, you can go into depth. But helping them understand the ways in which other people might have to live their life only increases empathy. Because if they're not exposed to any of those things, they are going to have a harder time understanding what it might be like to be them. And isn't that sort of the crux of inclusivity, right? It's our ability to be able to put ourselves in someone else's shoes. That's empathy at its finest. So we have to, as parents, be able to give them the knowledge that there are other ways in which people have to live, and that can be really, really tough. But also don't be worried that this is going to suddenly happen to you, right? Because that's kind of where their brain goes. I will tell you that my 12-year-old, my youngest is a cancer survivor, my 12-year-old said to me yesterday, my 12-year-old, she said to me, Mom, I remember when Sydney was sick, I thought all babies had cancer. And it never occurred to me to tell her that this was just sort of bad luck and this is not going to happen if you have babies someday, because she says that she was worried when she had a baby someday that her baby was going to have cancer, and she's been like sitting with that, for the last 8 years or whatever it is. Kids' imaginations are wild, and the things that they sort of make up in order to help make sense of the world is often far worse than the actual facts. So be honest with your kids. Inclusivity with differing family rules. I bring this one up because while it's not necessarily, under the whole diversity category, it is, and it's something that's very, very prominent in schools, and we hear about a lot. And I'm sure you probably will, if you haven't heard it yet, you will hear about it in the next journey, and the journey of your parenthood through 18 or probably beyond. It's, why does so-and-so get a phone at this age and we don't? Why does so-and-so get to watch, screens during the week and we don't? Why does so-and-so get to have video game console and we don't? Why are you so strict and make us go to bed at this time and we don't? And this one for me has always been tricky because particularly those who have family rules that don't align with yours, you don't want to throw them under the bus, right? Because again, I will tell you, this just happened last week in pre-K. A little kid came and, will come and say, my mom said, right, X, Y, and Z, and you're like, all right, don't say these things to your kids. I'm telling you, they say them out loud. So don't say to your kid, oh, that's because their parents don't love them as much as we love them. Right? Oh, that's because their parents clearly don't know how to parent well. It's like, no, don't say those things. I don't care if you're thinking them. Don't say them out loud, okay? Because I'm telling you, your kid's going to repeat it. I don't care if you think you have the most trustworthy 4-year-old in America. They're going to repeat it. Or if they get backed in a corner and someone has said something mean to them, they're going to use it. Well, guess what? It's, the reason you're acting like this is because my mom said you played too many video games, right? And then it's like, right, it's one thing to, as a kid, get dissed by a peer, but it's another thing, a whole new level, when you think that peer's parents are judging you, right? Imagine being like an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old and hearing, well, my parents said I can't play with you because, X, Y, and Z. That hurts at a whole new level. So just think, anything that you say to your child is going to be used as warfare at some point. So make sure that you are careful with your words. And your words don't have to stray from what you believe and what your family rules are. Stick to your guns, whatever guns that you've chosen, stick to them, that's fine. But be prepared with some language of what to say. So things like, oh, wow, you might validate, man, sounds like you really wish you had those same rules as Johnny does in their house. Yeah, it's not fair. He gets to play video games whenever he wants. Okay, well, you know what? All of us parents are just doing the best that we can with the information that we have. And for us, Dad and I, Mom and I, partner and I, whoever, or just me, have decided that this is what we think will be best for you. Period. You don't have to give long explanations. You don't have to, sometimes I will say, you know what? I have made this choice. The research says X, Y, and Z. I will tell my kids the why behind things, but also I bend my own rules sometimes. Like there's nobody, probably all of you, if you can remember back to before you were parents, how you thought you had really great advice for people who were parents, right? Like, I will never let my kid do X, Y, and Z, and probably most of you are at least doing one of those things that you said you would never do. Yeah, so I always tell my kids too, like parenting is a learning journey, right? Just because I have rules right now that I think I'm going to uphold doesn't mean that they might not change, and doesn't mean that they might not be able to persuade me in some way, shape, or form. Like we all have our hills to die on, but there are going to be some flexibility that you are going to most likely exercise over the next 10, 15 years of your parenting journey. But do not put anyone else down in the process. I'm telling you, it is hard because especially when you're trying to figure out how to sort of justify to your own child why you're making these choices, and maybe you've read a lot of books, you read a lot of literature, you've talked to a lot of other families, and you are feeling really strongly about things, doesn't mean that those rules would work really well in the other house for somebody else. We often don't know what's happening in someone else's house and what they might need. And you know what? They might have other stuff going on where their kid needs to have some screen time because it's for their own sanity. There are lots of different things. So I just urge you, stick to your own rules. That is fine. Explain to your kids why you have your rules. That is a different thing from our generation too, right? We're helping kids to understand better versus just, I said so. Because kids dig their heels in and build a lot of resentment with because I said so. Explain to them why. You know what, I'm choosing to do this because I know that for brain development, this is better for this. Other families might choose something different because of what's better for their kids. No judgment, right? This is what we're going to do in our house, and I'm sorry if you hate it. It's not my job for you to be my best friend. Sometimes you're going to hate me. But I hope that you still love me, and I promise you someday we can talk more about this. All right, last category, inclusivity with mental health or invisible illnesses, which is my favorite one to talk about, obviously, from my job, but also the hardest one to talk about as a parent. It's much easier to explain to your kids to be kind and inclusive to the kid who is in a wheelchair or has hearing aids, or whatever it is, something that you can see, right? It's so much easier because it is concrete and you can help them understand, and then it's in their face at all times. So it's like a reminder to be empathetic and to be kind because they have a disadvantage to me, right? So much easier to have those conversations. What's harder is for the kid who has ADHD or anxiety or depression or bipolar or chronic pain or some other invisible illness that you can't see as a reminder all of the time. And these are the conversations that I think that I want you all to start having more frequently. Because these are the kids who need empathy as well. So, and these are also the kids who will face a different challenge their whole life, right? Because no one can see their illness in the same way. And so I encourage you, if a kid comes home to you and says something like, so-and-so is so annoying because they're always blurting out and they never stay in their seat, they're not following the rules, or so-and-so's following me around at recess, they don't say anything to me, they don't want to play what we're playing, but they just keep following me, and it's so annoying, right? These are the conversations that are a little bit harder to navigate at home, right? Because it'd be easier just to be like, just ignore it, just walk away, whatever. That's fine. Those are some strategies that they can do, but what I want you to help them understand is possibly the why behind it, right? So I'm not here to tell you to excuse everyone's behavior, because there's no excuse. So if someone's being treated unkindly, you might still press back and be like, I wonder what's going on for that other kid. But it doesn't mean you have to be like, it's okay that they did that to you because of what's going on, right? Those are two different things. So I want you to help them understand the potential why behind it, but I also don't want you to teach them that they have to just take it if there's something that's bothering them or frustrating them. So, couple of things. Teaching tolerance is different than inclusivity in some ways. So if your child comes home and says any one of those scenarios, you might first say to them, whatever sort of sentiment they're coming back, wow, that must be frustrating. Or wow, that does kind of sound annoying. And then you might say, how are you reacting? Right? So you might put it back on them. So what do you do when that happens? And then listen. Okay? And then you might push on perspective, help them with perspective taking, right? So, I wonder, what do you think that other person is thinking when they're doing those things? What do you think that they're feeling when they're doing those things? Help them just take 1 to 2 minutes to just pause and take some perspective. Perspective and the ability to take perspective and then also empathize doesn't come naturally to every kid. So you might have, if you have multiple kids in your own house, you might say one of my kids is really empathetic and is really good at taking perspective, and you might say another one of them doesn't do it very well, and you're like, where did I go wrong? But you didn't. It's personality based, a lot of it, but it can be taught. And so helping kids just take 1 to 2 minutes to sort of get out of this like, oh, it's so annoying, or it's so frustrating, or they're so weird, or whatever they want to say, and help them just perspective take for a minute. You don't have to diagnose the other student. You don't have to say, oh, well, they could have ADHD, or they could have whatever, but just help them understand that their brain might be working differently than yours. Right? And that's the reality that we all walk around with all day long, and we just get better at sort of at hiding those things as we get older, and your kids will all too. But what we need to help them understand is that there is a function behind everyone's behavior, right? No kid is just out there trying to live their life as the most annoying kid in the world, right? Like that is not a thing. Like, kids at their heart want to be loved, and they want to be accepted, and they want to do well. Every single child, they want to do all of those things at their core. So for kids who have a harder time doing those things, let's build in a little empathy and a little tolerance for our own children who might not have those same challenges. So tolerance meaning being able to sit, back to my distress tolerance for any of you who came to that talk a couple of years ago, our ability to sort of tolerate discomfort is getting less and less over the generations. So if there is a kid who is popping up out of the seat, being distracting, whatever, first help your kid learn how to sort of tolerate some of that discomfort. Yes, it might be distracting to them. Yes, it might be annoying to them. But the reality is that the other child is working on their stuff too, I assure you. The teachers are working, this community, we are very quick to help kids and parents reach their fullest potential. So I promise you that we are not allowing any kid to just sit out there and flounder as the most annoying kid, right? Like that's not, we're not helping anybody become that kid, and nor do we want them to, because we know that doesn't feel good. So while it might be affecting your child, and your child might come home being like, this is so annoying, and this is different than if someone's being mean to them. I'm not talking about that. It's more of just somebody's in their space or in their classroom and it has a behavior that's different than their behaviors, and it's bothering them. Helping your child increase their discomfort tolerance, right? Like, gosh, what can you do for yourself when that's happening? What can you do to help sort of learn how to tolerate that a little bit, and also then protect yourself and help yourself get back on track? Versus like, what can we do to make that kid stop? That is a lot of the mindset for a lot of us parents who want to just make everything, easy and cushiony for our own children. But the reality is that everywhere in life, in our jobs or whatever, people are neurodivergent, and they're learning and they're acting and behaving in different ways, and their brains are working in different ways. And we need to teach our kids at a very young age that people's brains work differently than ours. And some people work harder to read, other people work harder to sit still and pay attention, other people work really hard to figure out how to enter a conversation and play with other kids. Those skills don't come naturally to everyone, and if the more that we can educate our kids about that that's a thing that might be happening for this other student, it doesn't excuse if they're being mean to you, but it does help them understand what might be happening for someone else. Or for the kid who might cry over everything. This is annoying. Why do they keep crying? Who knows what's happening for them in their brain, right? Something is going on with their brain, because nobody wants to be doing that all the time. I'm telling you, nobody wants to. So helping your kid sort of understand that. Something might be happening for them. What do you think it could be? I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But let's have a little tolerance. Let's have a little compassion. I'm sure that your teachers, the adults at campus, are helping that student work through what they need to work through. Let's focus on what you can do to help make sure that you are learning in your best environment. Does that make sense? Knowledge is power. That's what I tell everyone. The more your kid knows about who they are and about who other people are, the greater understanding, compassion, empathy that they can have. The more narrow their world is, the more narrow their scope and ability to be able to be inclusive is. The more that they understand, the more that they can embrace. I think that's all I have. Anybody have any questions?